He's a grieving father, holding his family together with nothing but grit and faith. She's a powerful CEO, alive only because of a heart transplant. Their worlds should never collide until one simple act of kindness changes everything. When she sees the scar on his arm, a shocking memory floods back. It's the same man she saw praying in the hospital chapel the night she received her new heart. The truth she carries could heal his shattered world or tear it apart forever. Their connection isn't just chance, it's destiny. But when secrets, suspicion, and scandal threaten to destroy them both, will this broken janitor and this lonely CEO find redemption together, or lose everything once again? What happens when the heart that saved her belonged to the wife he lost? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The pre-dawn silence of Riverside High School's cafeteria was broken only by the steady swish of Eli Gardner's mop across the linoleum floor and the soft murmur of the ancient radio perched on his cleaning cart. The February morning pressed dark against the windows, and the fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the empty tables. Eli worked methodically, row by row, his movements precise from years of practice. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle with familiar ease. His Army motor pool training still showing in the way he maintained perfect parallel lines as he cleaned. The radio crackled with early morning news, its volume kept low out of habit. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the tragic multi-vehicle pileup on Route 17. The announcer's voice cut through the quiet. The accident, which claimed 6 lives and injured dozens more, remains one of the worst traffic incidents in county history. Eli's hands tightened on the mop handle. The lightning-shaped scar on his forearm seemed to tingle beneath his rolled-up sleeve, and he paused his work to rub it absently. The raised tissue felt rough under his calloused fingers, a permanent reminder of that rainy night when he'd lost Denise. The memory rose unbidden. The screech of tires, the crunch of metal, the flash of emergency lights through the downpour. He'd been reaching across to protect Denise when their car hit the guardrail. The metal had torn through his arm, leaving behind the jagged mark that looked like a bolt of lightning. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered, his deep voice barely audible over the hum of the overhead lights. He dunked the mop back into the bucket with perhaps more force than necessary, sending small ripples across the surface of the cleaning solution. The radio droned on, switching to a cheerful commercial about car insurance that made Eli's jaw clench. He reached over and turned it off, preferring the silence. In the quiet, he could almost hear Denise's voice teasing him about being too thorough with his mopping technique. "You're cleaning a high school cafeteria, not preparing for a military inspection, honey." The memory brought a slight smile to his face, despite the ache in his chest. Denise had always known how to lighten his mood, how to soften his serious edges. Now that task often fell to their granddaughter Tasha. As if summoned by his thoughts, the cafeteria door burst open with a bang that echoed through the empty space. Tasha Gardner rushed in, her backpack slung haphazardly over one shoulder and her nursing textbook clutched to her chest. "Grandpa," she called out, her sneakers squeaking on the still damp floor. "I knew I'd find you here already. Do you ever sleep?" "Careful there," Eli warned, gesturing at the wet floor with his mop. "And yes, I sleep. Just not as much as teenagers who can't seem to get up on time." Tasha navigated around the mopped areas with the grace of long practice, making her way to where Eli stood. "I'm not late, I'm early." The first bell hasn't even rung yet. She studied his face with knowing eyes. "You've got that serious look again, the one that means you're thinking too much." Eli shrugged, turning back to his mopping. "Just doing my job, sweetheart." "Uh-huh." Tasha set her books down on a dry section of counter and crossed her arms. "And I suppose the radio being off has nothing to do with what day it is." Sometimes Eli wished his granddaughter wasn't quite so perceptive. She had her grandmother's gift for reading people, particularly him. "You've got classes to prepare for," he deflected, but his voice was gentle. "And you've got that thing you do where you try to carry everything by yourself," Tasha countered. She stepped closer, careful of the wet floor, and touched his arm right above the scar. "Grandma wouldn't want that." Eli's movement slowed, then stopped. He looked down at his granddaughter, seeing so much of Denise in her determined expression. No, he admitted softly. She wouldn't. She'd probably tell you to turn that radio back on and find something with a good beat to mop to, Tasha said, her serious expression breaking into a grin. Despite himself, Eli chuckled. That she would. Your grandmother once tried to convince me to do the electric slide while buffing the gym floor. Did you? What do you think? I think you probably told her it wasn't regulation. Tasha's eyes sparkled with mischief. But I also think you probably did it anyway, when no one was looking. The memory warmed him, pushing back some of the morning's heaviness. That information is classified, young lady. The first bell rang then, its sharp peal echoing through the building. The sound of distant doors opening and voices filling the hallways filtered into their quiet space. That's my cue, Tasha said, gathering her books. She stretched up on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. Don't work too hard, Grandpa. And maybe find a good song to mop to? Eli watched her go, her words echoing in his mind. He looked at his cleaning cart, at the silent radio, then back at the floor. After a moment's consideration, he bowed his head slightly. Lord, he whispered, help me get through this day. And, he paused, almost hearing Denise's encouraging voice, maybe send a little music my way too. With a small sigh, he gathered his bucket and mop, ready to move on to the next task as the sounds of students arriving filled the halls outside. The mid-morning sun had finally broken through the February clouds, casting long shadows across Riverside High's parking lot. Eli wheeled his cleaning cart toward the maintenance shed, ready to tackle the next item on his endless to-do list. The rhythmic squeak of the cart's wheels accompanied his steady pace as he navigated between the rows of parked cars. A sharp sound cut through the quiet, the distinctive whir-click of a car engine failing to turn over. Eli paused, cocking his head to listen. The sound came again, followed by what seemed to be a muffled sigh of frustration. Following the noise, he rounded the corner to find a sleek, silver Mercedes sedan parked in one of the visitor spots. Behind the wheel sat a woman in a tailored navy suit, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She tried the ignition again, but the engine only clicked weakly in response. Eli approached the driver's side window, making sure to stay visible. The woman looked up, and despite her obvious frustration, her expression remained composed. She rolled down the window, revealing features that spoke of both authority and grace. Having some trouble? Eli asked, his voice gentle and professional. Yes, she replied, her tone measured despite the circumstances. I'm Marion Klein. I was here for the donor's breakfast, and now my car seems to have other plans. Mind if I take a look? Eli offered. I used to work as a mechanic in the Army motor pool. Marion's shoulders relaxed slightly. Please, I'd appreciate that very much. She popped the hood release, and Eli heard the mechanical click. Moving to the front of the car, Eli lifted the hood with practiced ease. The engine compartment was spotless, everything in its proper place. He noticed the battery right away. It was relatively new, but the terminals told a different story. Try starting it once more, he called out. When Marion turned the key, Eli watched the connections carefully. I think I see the problem. He pulled a small folding knife from his pocket, the same one he'd carried since his Army days. You've got some corrosion on your battery terminals. It's pretty common in this weather. He demonstrated by pointing to the greenish-white buildup around the connection. Sometimes all it needs is a good cleaning. Marion stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the asphalt as she came to observe. I had it serviced just last month, she said, a note of concern in her voice. This can happen pretty quick, Eli explained, carefully scraping away at the corrosion with his knife blade, especially with all the salt on the roads this time of year. His movements were precise and careful, each stroke of the blade deliberate. As he worked, his sleeve began to ride up his forearm. The morning sun caught the raised edges of his lightning-shaped scar, making it stand out against his skin. He was so focused on his task that he didn't notice Marion's sharp intake of breath. There we go, he said, satisfied with his work. He used his handkerchief to wipe away the loosened corrosion, then tightened the connection. Try it now. Marion didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at his exposed forearm where the scar traced its jagged path across his skin. Her face had gone pale, and her hand trembled slightly as she raised it to her throat. "It can't be," she whispered so softly that Eli barely heard her. He glanced down at his arm, then tugged his sleeve back into place with a casual motion. "Just an old war wound," he said with a gentle smile, misreading her reaction as concern. "Nothing to worry about. Let's see if we can get you back on the road." The leather seats of Marion's Mercedes felt foreign to Eli as he settled in, his weathered work clothes, a stark contrast against the pristine interior. He placed his calloused hands on his knees, keeping them deliberately still, conscious of every movement. "You really don't have to do this, Miss Klein," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he used when soothing Tasha's scraped knees. "I've got plenty to do back at the school." Marion adjusted her rearview mirror, her movements precise and practiced. "Please, call me Marion. And I insist, you saved me from missing this breakfast entirely. The least I can do is give you a ride." Her smile was warm but professional, the kind she'd perfected over years of board meetings. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Eli noticed how she handled the car with the same quiet confidence she'd shown earlier. The engine purred smoothly now, thanks to his quick fix with the battery terminal. "You mentioned you learned about cars in the Army?" Marion asked, her eyes on the road. "Yes, ma'am. Motor pool mechanic for 12 years. He paused, then added with a hint of pride, "Never met an engine. I couldn't coax back to life." The familiar route to St. Michael's Hospital stretched before them. Marion's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel as memories washed over her. Memories of a very different drive along these same streets, 5 years ago. She'd been in the back of an ambulance that night, her heart failing, each breath a struggle. The sirens had wailed through the darkness, cutting through the same February chill that hung in the air today. The doctors had been direct. Without a transplant, she had days, maybe hours. Then the call came. A donor heart, a perfect match. Her throat tightened as she remembered the hours before surgery, drifting in and out of consciousness. The hospital chaplain had been there, holding her hand, praying. Through the haze of medication and fear, she'd heard snippets of conversation outside her room. About a terrible crash on Route 17, multiple casualties. Later, much later, when she was stronger, she'd walked past the hospital chapel. There had been a man inside, kneeling in the dim light. His sleeve was rolled up, revealing a distinctive scar like a bolt of lightning. She'd heard him praying, his voice rough with grief. "The Lord is my shepherd." Now, stealing a glance at her passenger, Marion felt her heart, someone else's heart, beating faster. The same scar she'd glimpsed in the parking lot was partially visible beneath Eli's rolled sleeve. His hands rested on his knees, strong and capable, marked with the honest wear of work and time. The morning traffic moved slowly, giving her time to study him without being obvious. There was something in his bearing, a kind of quiet dignity that seemed familiar. The way he held himself, even in obvious discomfort at being in her car, spoke of someone who carried both strength and sorrow. "Do you know St. Michael's well?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Eli nodded, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Some. My wife." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Yes, I know it." They passed the hospital's east wing, where the cardiac unit occupied the 4th floor. Marion remembered looking out those windows during her recovery, watching the seasons change as her body learned to accept its new heart. She'd written countless letters in her head to the donor's family, but medical privacy laws meant they would never be sent. The parking garage came into view, its entrance adorned with banners announcing the donor appreciation breakfast. Eli shifted in his seat, obviously uncomfortable with the approaching event. "You don't have to stay for the whole thing," Marion said softly, understanding his reluctance. "Sometimes just showing up is enough." He gave her a grateful look. "Thank you, Miss Marion. That's kind of you." As she pulled into a reserved space, Marion glanced once more at his hands resting on his knees. The same hands she'd seen clasped in prayer that night, she was certain now. The same voice that had whispered Psalm 23 in the darkness belonged to this quiet man who fixed her car without hesitation or expectation. "It is him," she whispered to herself, so quietly the words were barely a breath. Eli turned toward her. "Did you say something?" "Just talking to myself," she replied, reaching for her briefcase. "Shall we?" The high school gymnasium had been transformed for the donor breakfast. White tablecloths draped over the round tables masked their everyday cafeteria origins. Crystal water glasses caught the morning light streaming through the high windows, creating tiny rainbows on the walls where basketball championship banners usually commanded attention. Eli sat near the back, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The coffee in front of him had gone cold, untouched. He watched as Marian took the podium, her silver hair catching the light, her posture elegant but approachable. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Today, we gather to talk about something precious, the gift of life itself." She paused, touching her chest briefly. 7 years ago I stood in a hospital room saying goodbye to my family. My heart was failing, and the doctors had done everything they could. The words hit Eli like physical blows. 7 years, the same time frame since he'd lost Denise. His scar began to itch, and he rubbed it unconsciously through his sleeve. "But then, a miracle happened," Marian continued, her voice thick with emotion. Someone I never met, gave me the most extraordinary gift imaginable. Their family, in the depths of their own grief, chose to think of others, to give life in the midst of loss." The room grew unbearably warm. Eli loosened his collar, but it didn't help. The faces around him blurred as memories crashed over him like waves, the screech of tires, the flash of emergency lights, the endless hospital corridors, and that final, impossible decision. "Every breath I take," Marian was saying, "every sunrise I see, every moment I get to spend with my loved ones, these are all borrowed blessings. They come from a family who in their darkest hour said yes to hope." Eli stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. A few heads turned, but most remained fixed on Marian. He moved quickly toward the exit, trying to be invisible, trying to outrun the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. The cool morning air hit his face as he stumbled out of the gymnasium. Across the street, the familiar spire of St. Michael's Hospital Chapel rose against the blue sky. His feet carried him there automatically, following a path he'd walked countless times during those terrible days 7 years ago. The chapel doors opened silently. Inside, the familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals wrapped around him like a blanket. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the empty pews in blues and golds. Eli sank into the last row, his shoulders shaking. This was where he'd made the decision. Right here, in this very pew, he'd signed the papers that would give Denise's heart to a stranger. He'd prayed Psalm 23 over and over, asking for strength he wasn't sure he had. "The Lord is my shepherd," he whispered now, his voice rough. "I shall not want." The words caught in his throat. Behind him, the chapel door opened quietly. Soft footsteps approached, hesitant but determined. Eli didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The knowledge had been building all morning, from the moment she'd seen his scar in the parking lot. "Mr. Gardner." Marian's voice was gentle, barely above a whisper. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the wooden frame. The morning light, through the stained glass, cast colored shadows across her face. "Eli." He kept his eyes fixed on the altar ahead, unable to turn and face her. His hands gripped the back of the pew in front of him, so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I recognized you," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "When I saw your scar this morning, the doctors, they couldn't tell me who my donor was, but they mentioned that her husband had prayed in the chapel. They described your scar, how you'd been reading Psalm 23. Eli closed his eyes, feeling tears slide down his cheeks. The memory of that night was razor sharp. The weight of the pen in his hand, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, the way the consent forms had blurred through his tears. "I've wanted to thank you for so long," Marian's voice cracked. She took a step closer, her heels clicking softly on the stone floor. "The heart that beats in me came from your wife." The Bell, Whistle Diner, sat quietly in the afternoon lull, its neon open sign buzzing softly against the window. Inside, the smell of coffee and grilled onions hung in the air, mixing with the lingering scent of the morning's pancakes. At a corner booth away from the windows, Eli Gardner and Marian Klein sat across from each other, 2 steaming mugs of coffee, creating a fragrant barrier between them. The vinyl booth squeaked as Eli shifted uncomfortably. His work uniform, usually a source of simple pride, felt suddenly conspicuous next to Marion's tailored blazer. His calloused fingers traced the handle of his mug, but he couldn't bring himself to lift it. Marion broke the heavy silence first. "I wanted to tell you so many times over the years." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "But there are laws, strict medical privacy laws, that prevent donor recipients from knowing their donors' identities." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with her usual composure. "I understand that," Eli said, his voice rough. "What I don't understand is how you're so sure it was Denise's." He couldn't finish the sentence. Marion's fingers unconsciously moved to her chest, resting where her scar would be beneath her clothes. "That night in the chapel," she began, her eyes growing distant with memory. "I was scared, terrified really. My heart was failing, and the doctors had given me hours, maybe minutes. Then my surgeon burst in with news of a donor match. The afternoon sun slanted through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across their table. A waitress approached, coffee pot in hand, but seeing their untouched mugs and the intensity of their conversation, she quietly retreated. "I saw you there," Marion continued, her eyes focusing on Eli's face. "In that same chapel. You were wearing an army jacket, and when you rolled up your sleeves to pray." She gestured to his forearm, where the lightning-shaped scar was now hidden beneath his sleeve. "That scar, I never forgot it. You were praying, Psalm 23. Eli's throat tightened. "The Lord is my shepherd," he whispered, the words coming unbidden to his lips. "I shall not want," Marion completed softly. "I heard you that night, your voice breaking over those words. I wanted to reach out, to say something, but what could I say? And then later, when I recovered and learned about the confidentiality rules." She spread her hands helplessly on the table. The diner's clock ticked steadily above them. Someone dropped a fork in the kitchen with a metallic clatter. Normal sounds that seemed somehow intrusive in the weight of this moment. "The timing matches," Eli said slowly, his mind working through the details. "The crash was at 7:42 p.m. They pronounced her at." His voice caught, "At 11:17. Marion nodded, her eyes glistening. "My transplant surgery began at 2 a.m. The heart, Denise's heart. It was perfect. The doctors said they'd never seen such a strong match." "She was always strong," Eli said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Strongest person I ever knew. Even when she was sick, she'd push through, never complained." "I've tried to honor that strength," Marion said earnestly, leaning forward slightly. "Every day, I wake up knowing I'm living on borrowed time, precious time that came at such a cost to your family. I've tried to use it well." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "That's why I transformed KleinMed's focus to preventive care and community outreach, why we've funded so many health initiatives in underserved areas." Eli watched as she spoke, seeing not the polished CEO but a woman carrying an enormous weight of gratitude. His eyes drifted to her chest, knowing that beneath the expensive silk blouse, Denise's heart beat steadily, keeping this stranger alive. "Not a stranger anymore," he realized. "When I found out I needed a transplant," Marion continued, her voice thick with emotion, "my first thought was guilt. Someone would have to die for me to live. I promised myself then that if I survived, I would make every heartbeat count." The afternoon light had shifted, turning golden as it filtered through the diner's dusty windows. A young couple walked past outside, laughing, unaware of the profound conversation happening just feet away. Eli's hands, which had been clenched tightly in his lap, slowly relaxed. He looked at Marion, really looked at her, and saw the life in her cheeks, the brightness in her eyes, the energy in her movements, all powered by Denise's final gift. "That heart," he said finally, his own voice rough with emotion, "it kept her alive in another way." His eyes misted over as he spoke, but he didn't try to hide it. The evening sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows of Eli's modest ranch-style house. The familiar scent of garlic and tomato sauce filled the air as Tasha stirred a pot of spaghetti, her movements quick and precise. Steam rose in gentle wisps. Fogging the window above the sink were a small collection of potted herbs. Denise's favorites still grew. Eli sat at the worn kitchen table, his work uniform traded for a faded blue flannel shirt. His fingers traced the wood-grain patterns as he searched for the right words. The day's revelations felt too big for their small kitchen, too heavy for the quiet life they'd built here. "So, this woman," Tasha began, her back still turned to him as she stirred the sauce, "just happens to be the one who got Grandma's heart?" Her voice carried an edge that reminded Eli of her mother when she was upset. "It wasn't planned, Tasha." Eli's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Klein didn't know who I was until she saw my scar today." Tasha dropped the wooden spoon with a clatter, spinning around. Her dark eyes flashed with emotion. "And you believe that? Just like that?" She crossed her arms, looking so much like Denise in that moment that Eli's chest tightened. "A rich CEO who runs the biggest hospital system in the state just happens to show up at our school? She was there for the donor breakfast." "Exactly." Tasha threw up her hands. "A donor breakfast, where she can show everyone what a good person she is, how generous her company is. And now she's found the perfect story. The humble janitor, whose wife's heart saved her life." The last words came out bitter and sharp. Eli pushed back from the table slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "Tasha, honey." "Don't honey me, Grandpa." She turned back to the stove, attacking the pasta with the strainer more forcefully than necessary. "I've seen how these things work. They'll put you on TV, make you cry about Grandma, all so people will forget about that story last month about Klein Med turning away patients who couldn't pay." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of water hitting the sink. Eli watched his granddaughter's shoulders shake slightly as she gripped the counter edge. He understood her anger. It was easier than the raw grief that still ambushed them both some days. "Your grandmother," he said finally, "always said we should give people a chance to prove who they are, not who we fear they might be." Tasha's shoulders slumped. "Grandma wasn't here to see how people treated us after the accident. All those reporters wanting their tragic story, the lawyers with their papers." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And now this woman has Grandma's heart, and she probably thinks that gives her some kind of claim on us." Eli stood up, crossing the kitchen to place a gentle hand on Tasha's shoulder. "Nobody has any claim on us, sweetheart. And nobody's going to use your grandmother's memory for anything." "You don't know that." Tasha's voice cracked. "Rich folks don't do anything unless it benefits them somehow. That's just how the world works." The truth of her words, born from watching him struggle with hospital bills and insurance companies after Denise's death, hit Eli hard. He squeezed her shoulder once before moving to the living room drawer where he kept Denise's things. The photograph was worn at the corners from years of handling. Denise in her garden, laughing at something off camera, her gray-streaked hair caught in the sunlight. Eli traced her smile with one finger before carefully folding the photo and placing it back in the drawer. In the kitchen, Tasha aggressively plated the pasta, the scrape of fork against ceramic expressing what words couldn't. "Rich folks don't do anything unless it benefits them," she muttered again, softer this time. But the words still carried their weight through the quiet house. Eli closed the drawer with a gentle click, letting the sound of his granddaughter's hurt wash over him. He had no answers, no wise words to make this easier. Just the memory of Denise's laugh and the strange knowledge that somewhere across town, her heart still beat in another woman's chest. The evening settled around them, heavy with unspoken fears and the lingering scent of tomato sauce. Through the kitchen window, Denise's herbs swayed gently in the evening breeze, their shadows dancing across the countertop like memories that refused to fade. The fluorescent lights of Klein Med Hospital cast a sterile glow across the polished floors as Eli and Tasha followed Marion through the sliding glass doors. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, warming the otherwise clinical atmosphere. Tasha walked slightly behind her grandfather, her arms crossed, her nursing textbook clutched protectively against her chest. "The cardiac wing is on the 4th floor," Marion explained, her heels clicking steadily against the tile. She wore a navy blue dress today, professional but approachable, and her silver hair caught the light as she turned to make sure they were keeping pace. "The staff is excited to meet you both." Eli nodded, his work-roughened hands stuffed into the pockets of his best khakis. He'd ironed them carefully that morning, wanting to look presentable, though the crease wasn't quite as sharp as when Denise used to do it. The elevator dinged, and they stepped inside. "You don't have to do this," Tasha whispered to him as the doors closed. But Eli just squeezed her shoulder gently. The cardiac wing buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, checking monitors and speaking in hushed tones. At the central station, a group of staff members looked up as Marion approached. An older nurse with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Everyone," Marion said, her voice warm but carrying a slight tremor. "I'd like you to meet Eli Gardner and his granddaughter Tasha." She paused, gathering herself. "Eli's wife Denise was my donor." The reaction was immediate. The older nurse, her badge read Nancy, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Gardner," she said, voice thick with emotion, "I was here that night. I've never forgotten your family's gift." Other staff members gathered around, their faces showing a mix of awe and gratitude. A younger nurse wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. Even the usually stoic Dr. Chen, passing by with his charts, stopped to shake Eli's hand. "Your wife," Nancy continued, reaching out to touch Eli's arm. "She saved so many people that night. Not just through donation, but the way she lived. The other nurses told me how she'd bring homemade cookies to her checkups, always asking about our families." Tasha's rigid posture softened slightly as she watched the genuine emotion on the nurses' faces. These weren't rehearsed speeches or PR moments. These were people who had been touched by her grandmother's final gift. Marion guided them through the unit, past rooms where monitors beeped steadily and patients dozed. She spoke with quiet pride about the advances in cardiac care. But her voice held something deeper when she added, "None of this would matter without donors like Denise." They paused at a large window overlooking the city. Morning light streamed in, catching the tears that several staff members were trying to discreetly wipe away. A young resident approached hesitantly, holding out a tissue box to Tasha, who realized her own cheeks were wet. "Would you like to see something special?" Marion asked softly. At their nods, she led them down a quieter hallway to a sun-filled alcove. A large quilt hung on the wall, its patches a rainbow of colors and patterns. Each square held a name, delicately embroidered. Eli's breath caught as Marion pointed to one patch, a soft blue square with butterflies dancing across it. "Denise Gardner," Marion read aloud, her finger hovering over the stitched letters. "When I was recovering, I would come here and look at this quilt. I didn't know her name then, but I knew her heart was beating inside me." She turned to face Eli, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She saved me." Eli nodded silently, his hand reaching out to touch the patch that bore his wife's name. The morning sun warmed the fabric beneath his fingers, and for a moment he could almost feel Denise's presence there with them, her love still healing hearts in ways he never could have imagined. The evening sun cast long shadows through Pastor Ruth's kitchen window, warming the worn oak table where she and Eli sat with steaming mugs of chamomile tea. The familiar scent of fresh-baked banana bread filled the cozy room, a comfort food Ruth always seemed to have ready when troubled souls came calling. "I just don't know what to make of it all," Eli said, turning the blue ceramic mug between his calloused hands. "Meeting Marion like this, finding out she has Denise's," his voice caught. Even now, the words felt strange in his mouth. Pastor Ruth leaned forward, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the golden light. Her dark eyes held the wisdom of decades spent counseling her flock through life's hardest moments. "Tell me what troubles you most about it, Eli." He sighed, rubbing the lightning scar on his forearm, a habit he'd developed since Denise's passing. "Part of me feels like I'm betraying Denise somehow, getting close to the woman who—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "Who lives because Denise gave the ultimate gift of love," Ruth completed gently. She reached across the table and patted his hand. "Eli Gardner, in all my years of ministry, I've learned that God works in ways we least expect. Sometimes what looks like an ending becomes a beginning. Tasha thinks Marion might be using us somehow, Eli admitted, his voice low. For publicity or something. Ruth's kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background as she considered this. And what does your heart tell you about Marion? She seems, Eli paused, choosing his words carefully. Genuine, grateful, almost as lost as I am sometimes. He broke off a piece of banana bread but didn't eat it, just crumbled it between his fingers. When we were in the cardiac unit today, the way she spoke Denise's name, it was like a prayer. Maybe that's because it is, Ruth said softly. Every breath she takes, every heartbeat, it's a living prayer of thanksgiving. She poured more tea into both their cups. The question isn't whether God is working through this connection, Eli. The question is whether you're willing to trust His timing. Meanwhile, across town in the Klein Med Executive Conference Room, Marion sat straight-backed in her leather chair, facing down 6 stern faces of her board members. The late evening light threw harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table. These allegations about historical ambulance response times are concerning, Miss Klein, Bernard Matthews, the board chairman, said, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting, particularly in light of current community relations. Marion kept her voice steady, though her heart, Denise's heart, beat faster in her chest. The disparity in response times predated my tenure as CEO by several years. When I discovered the issue, I immediately terminated the problematic contract and implemented new protocols. Nevertheless, Patricia Walsh cut in, her red lipstick sharp against her pale face. There's growing scrutiny. We need to get ahead of this narrative. I agree, Marion said firmly. With transparency and accountability, not damage control. We owe our community the truth. The truth, Bernard scoffed, could bankrupt this hospital. We need to think about shareholder confidence, donor relationships. I am thinking about relationships, Marion interrupted, her normally diplomatic tone taking on an edge. With the actual human beings who trust us with their lives. The tension in the room thickened. Several board members exchanged glances. Speaking of relationships, Patricia said smoothly, there are rumors about you spending time with a particular donor family. That could be complicated. Marion felt heat rise in her chest. My personal connections are not board business. Everything about Klein Med is board business, Bernard replied coldly. We'll need to discuss this further at next week's emergency session. The meeting ended with stiff nods and veiled warnings. Marion gathered her papers with trembling hands, maintaining her composure until she reached her office. She sank into her chair, pressing her palm against her sternum, a gesture that had become both comfort and reminder of the precious gift she carried. Her phone buzzed with a text from her PR director. Investigative journalist asking about donor family. Call me. Marion's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady thrum of Denise's heart, her heart now, as it beat against her ribs. This was just the beginning, and she knew it. Her desk phone intercom buzzed. Ms. Klein, Pastor Delgado is here to see you. Marion straightened her spine, smoothed her skirt, and took a deep breath. Send her in. Saturday mornings at Pete's Diner had their own special rhythm. The sizzle of hash browns on the griddle, the clink of coffee cups against saucers, and the gentle hum of early conversations created a comfortable backdrop. Eli sat in his usual booth, the worn red vinyl cushion conforming to his shape after years of Saturday breakfasts with Denise. This time, Marion slid into the seat across from him, setting her purse carefully beside her. She looked different today, more relaxed in a simple sweater and slacks instead of her usual business attire. Her silver hair caught the morning light streaming through the window. I ordered you coffee, Eli said, gesturing to the steaming cup in front of her. Hope that's okay. Perfect. Thank you. Marion wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I have to admit, this is nicer than my usual breakfast meeting spots. Denise always said Pete's had the best pancakes in town. Eli's voice softened at the memory. She'd order a short stack every Saturday, but somehow always managed to steal half of mine too. A gentle smile crossed Marion's face. She sounds like she had a wonderful sense of humor. That she did. Eli stirred his coffee, watching the cream swirl. You know, She couldn't cook worth a darn when we first got married. Burned everything except toast. And sometimes even that. He chuckled. But she was determined to learn. Started watching cooking shows, practicing recipes. By the time Tasha came along, she could make a pot roast that would bring tears to your eyes. Good tears, I hope, Marion said, her eyes crinkling with amusement. The best kind. Eli paused as their waitress. Betty brought their orders. Eggs over easy for him, wheat toast and fruit for Marion. She had this special way of humming while she cooked. Different tunes for different dishes. I always knew we were having her famous meatloaf when she started humming Amazing Grace. Marion picked up a piece of toast, then set it down again. You know, after my transplant, the hardest part wasn't the physical recovery. It was the loneliness. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Everyone treated me like I was made of glass. Board members, friends, even my own sister. They were so afraid of saying the wrong thing that they barely said anything at all. Eli nodded, understanding in his eyes. Grief does that too. People don't know what to say, so they stay away. Or they give you those looks. You know the ones. Like they're waiting for you to break down? Marion asked. Exactly. Eli took a bite of his eggs. Though, sometimes, I wanted to tell them it's okay to mention her name. Denise wasn't a sad story. She was the best part of my life. Tell me more about her, Marion said softly. What made her laugh? Eli's face brightened. Oh, she had this ridiculous thing about squirrels. Called them nature's comedians. She'd sit on our back porch for hours, watching them raid the bird feeders, named every single one of them too. You're kidding, Marion said, leaning forward. Hand to heaven. We had Fred and Ethel, Lucy, and Ricky, all named after old TV shows she loved. She even bought them special feed, against my protests about encouraging them. And did the squirrels appreciate their gourmet dining experience? They got so spoiled, they'd sit on the porch railing and stare at us through the kitchen window if we were late with their breakfast. Marion laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. I haven't had pets since college. My schedule. She shrugged. But sometimes I watch the birds from my office window. There's this one cardinal that comes every morning, bright red against all that glass and steel. Nature finds a way, Eli said, even in the most unlikely places, like healing, Marion added quietly. I never expected to find it here, in a diner on Saturday morning. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Around them, the diner bustled with its weekend crowd, families with sleepy children, elderly couples sharing sections of the newspaper, teenagers huddled over plates of French toast. You know what's funny? Eli said suddenly. Denise would have loved this place even more now. See that young man behind the counter? He nodded toward a cook flipping pancakes with expert precision. That's Pete's grandson. He went to culinary school, came back to help his grandpa. Makes these fancy weekend specials. Blueberry lavender pancakes, stuff like that. Denise would have been first in line to try every single one. Blueberry lavender? Marion raised an eyebrow. That sounds terrible, Eli suggested. I was going to say ambitious, Marion said diplomatically. They looked at each other for a moment before both bursting into laughter. The sound was unexpected and genuine, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. Eli noticed how the laughter transformed Marion's whole face. The careful CEO persona falling away to reveal someone warmer, more approachable. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and her smile reached all the way up to them, making her look years younger. Denise had that same look when she laughed, he said without thinking, like the joy just couldn't help spilling out. Instead of the usual awkwardness that followed mentions of Denise, Marion's smile softened into something grateful. Thank you for sharing her with me, she said. Not just, she touched her chest briefly, but these memories too. They're precious gifts. The evening sun cast long shadows through Tasha's bedroom window as she sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by crumpled paper and college brochures. Her laptop hummed softly beside her, displaying the Klein Med Legacy of Life Scholarship application form. She'd been staring at it for the past hour, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Eli working in the garage. The familiar clinking of tools against metal usually brought her comfort, but tonight it made her heart ache. Every bang of a wrench reminded her of how hard he worked, how much he sacrificed to keep their little family going. Tasha smoothed out a fresh piece of paper and began writing her rough draft. The pencil scratched against the surface as she formed the words she'd been carrying in her heart for years. "My journey toward nursing began on a rainy night 5 years ago," she wrote, then paused to take a deep breath. The memories were still sharp, like broken glass. "My grandmother, Denise Gardner, was more than just a grandmother. She was my role model, my cheerleader, and the person who first showed me what it means to care for others." Her hand trembled slightly as she continued writing. She volunteered at the local clinic every Wednesday, bringing homemade cookies to the nurses and sitting with elderly patients who had no visitors. "I used to tag along after school, watching how she could make anyone smile, even on their worst days." Tasha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, determined to keep going. The words flowed easier now, like a dam breaking. She described watching the nurses at work, their efficiency and compassion, how they moved with purpose and treated everyone with dignity. "The night we lost her, I saw a different side of nursing," she wrote. "In those terrible hours at the hospital, it was a nurse who brought us blankets, who explained things in gentle terms, who held my hand when Grandpa was talking to the doctors. She didn't just treat patients, she cared for families too." The scholarship application asked for specific examples of leadership and community service. Tasha smiled as she detailed her volunteer work at the senior center, the blood drive she organized at school, the CPR classes she took over the summer. Each activity had been a step toward her dream, a way to honor her grandmother's memory. She turned to her laptop, carefully typing out her handwritten draft. The blue light of the screen illuminated her determined face as she refined her sentences, making sure every word carried the weight of her conviction. "Nursing isn't just a career choice for me," she typed. "It's a calling, a way to continue the legacy of care and compassion that my grandmother embodied. When I think about my future, I see myself walking the same hospital halls where she once spread joy, wearing scrubs instead of visiting clothes, bringing comfort to families facing their darkest hours." From downstairs came the sound of the garage door closing, followed by Eli's familiar footsteps. Tasha glanced at her clock. She'd been writing for nearly 3 hours. Her back ached from hunching over her laptop, but she was almost finished. The final paragraph was the hardest. How could she explain that every time she thought about accepting money from KleinMed, her stomach twisted with conflict? But as she typed, she realized something important. "This scholarship represents more than financial assistance," she wrote. "It represents an opportunity to bridge gaps, to show that healing happens in many ways. My grandmother's final act was to give life to others through organ donation. As a nurse, I want to honor that gift by dedicating my life to helping others live theirs to the fullest." Tasha printed the final version, reading it over one last time. Her eyes lingered on the required financial information section where she detailed their modest circumstances. Pride had made her hesitate, but honesty won out. They needed the help, and there was no shame in that. She carefully filled out the rest of the application forms, double-checking each detail. Her hand steady now, she signed her name at the bottom. The sound of the envelope sealing felt final, important. Standing up, she walked to the small shelf where she kept her grandmother's photo. In it, Denise wore her favorite yellow sweater, her smile bright and infectious. Tasha held the envelope close to her heart. "Wish me luck," she whispered to the smiling face in the frame. The sealed envelope sat on her desk, ready to be mailed tomorrow. On its front, in her neatest handwriting, was written, "KleinMed Legacy of Life Scholarship Committee." Inside were her dreams, her memories, and her promise to carry forward a legacy of caring that began long ago with a woman in a yellow sweater who believed in the power of kindness. Monday dawned crisp and clear, a deceptively beautiful autumn morning. Eli stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. The dark blue fabric, chosen carefully from his small collection, felt like it was strangling him. He hadn't worn a tie since Denise's funeral. His weathered hands smoothed down the front of his pressed white shirt, the one Tasha had insisted on ironing last night. The creases were perfect, almost military in their precision. Old habits from his army days surfaced as he gave himself a final inspection. Shoes polished to a shine, pants pressed, not a hair out of place. "You've got this, Grandpa," Tasha called from downstairs. "Your coffee's getting cold." Eli managed a small smile at his reflection, though his stomach churned with nervousness. After 15 years of faithful service as the school's janitor, he was finally interviewing for the facilities supervisor position. The previous supervisor, Mr. Face Jenkins, had retired last month, and several people had suggested Eli apply. In the kitchen, Tasha had set out his favorite mug, the one with the faded Army Motor Pool logo. She'd made his coffee just the way he liked it, strong and black. The familiar aroma helped settle his nerves a little. "You look sharp," she said, straightening his tie slightly, like one of those CEOs on TV. "Don't know about that," Eli chuckled softly. But her words warmed him. He checked his watch, still 45 minutes until the interview. Better early than late, he thought. The walk to school felt different today. Instead of his usual work clothes and tool belt, he wore his best suit, a bit tight in the shoulders now, but still presentable. Each step seemed to echo with importance. Parents dropping off their kids waved as usual, but did a double-take at his formal attire. The main office was quiet when he arrived, 20 minutes early. Ms. Sue Rodriguez, the secretary, gave him an encouraging smile. "They're running a bit behind schedule, Mr. Gardner. Have a seat." Eli lowered himself into one of the hard plastic chairs, trying not to wrinkle his suit. His fingers found their way to his forearm, absently tracing the raised edge of his scar through the shirt sleeve. The familiar gesture usually calmed him, but today it just reminded him of everything that had changed recently. The minutes ticked by slowly. He could hear muffled voices from behind the conference room door. Principal Matthews, Vice Principal Chen, and someone else he didn't recognize. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door opened. "Mr. Gardner?" Principal Matthews stepped out, professional but warm. "We're ready for you now." The conference room felt smaller than Eli remembered from staff meetings. 3 people sat at the long table: Principal Matthews, Vice Principal Chen, and a sharp-dressed man Eli didn't know. The stranger's expensive suit made Eli's feel shabby in comparison. "Please, have a seat," Principal Matthews gestured. "Let me introduce Mr. Wallace from the district board. He's sitting in on our supervisor interviews." Mr. Wallace barely looked up from his phone, offering only a curt nod. Eli settled into the chair, trying to keep his posture straight but relaxed, just like Tasha had coached him. The initial questions were straightforward enough. Eli described his years of service, his Army experience, his knowledge of the school's systems and schedules. He explained how he'd saved the district money by doing repairs himself instead of calling in contractors. Principal Matthews nodded approvingly at several points. Then Mr. Wallace finally looked up from his phone. "Mr. Gardner," he interrupted, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I understand you've recently become associated with Klein Med's CEO, Marion Klein?" The question caught Eli off guard. He felt heat rising in his neck but kept his voice steady. "Yes, sir. Miss Klein and I have become acquainted. Quite a story there, isn't it?" Wallace's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Very touching. The kind of thing that plays well in the media." Principal Matthews shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wallace, I don't see how that's relevant to—" "Oh, it's very relevant," Wallace continued. "In today's climate, optics matter. A humble janitor with a heartwarming connection to a major healthcare CEO. It's practically made for the evening news." He leaned forward slightly. That kind of publicity could be valuable to the district. The words hit Eli like physical blows. Each one stripped away his dignity, reduced his 15 years of service to a public relations opportunity. His scar began to throb, a dull ache that matched the pounding in his chest. "With all due respect, sir," Eli managed to say, his voice quieter than he intended, "I'm applying based on my qualifications and experience, nothing else." Wallace's smile widened fractionally. "Of course you are, and those qualifications are adequate. But let's be honest, In your position, wouldn't you want to leverage every advantage? Vice Principal Chen cleared her throat sharply. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. We have your work history and references. We'll be in touch soon. The dismissal was clear. Eli stood, careful to keep his face neutral, despite the burning in his chest. He shook their hands, even Wallace's, though the man's grip was deliberately limp, and walked out with his head high. But once outside the main office, his shoulders sagged. The hallways he'd maintained so carefully for 15 years suddenly felt foreign and cold. Students rushed past him, some calling out greetings, but he barely heard them. The walk home seemed twice as long as usual. Each step felt heavy, weighted down by Wallace's implications. Eli's hand found its way to his forearm again, rubbing the scar through his sleeve. The familiar ridge of tissue throbbed beneath his fingers, a physical reminder of everything he'd lost and gained, and how some people would always see him as nothing more than a story to tell. He kept his head down as he walked, watching his polished shoes scuff against the sidewalk, the shine already dulling in the autumn dust. The hospital garden bloomed with late summer flowers, their colors bright against the weathered brick walls. Eli waited on a wooden bench, watching medical staff hurry past in their colorful scrubs. The morning sun warmed his face as he checked his watch. 7:55 a.m. Marion was always precisely on time for their Wednesday walks. Right on schedule, she appeared through the garden's wrought iron gate, wearing comfortable walking shoes beneath her usual tailored suit. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, and despite her professional appearance, there was a tiredness around her eyes that Eli had learned to recognize. "Good morning," she said, smiling warmly. "Ready for our laps?" Eli stood, falling into step beside her, as they began their familiar route around the garden's circular path. The gravel crunched softly beneath their feet. "How's the heart feeling today?" he asked, matching her measured pace. "Strong," Marion replied, patting her chest lightly. "Dr. Chen says my numbers are perfect. Though the board meetings lately," she shook her head. "Those test my stamina more than any treadmill." They passed a cluster of purple coneflowers, their petals drawing butterflies. A young mother wheeled her child past in the opposite direction, the little boy waving cheerfully at them. "Denise loved butterflies," Eli said softly. "She'd plant specific flowers just to attract them. Used to laugh like sunshine when they'd land on her garden hat." Marion slowed her pace slightly. "Tell me more about her laugh." Eli's face softened with memory. It was infectious, started deep in her chest and just bubbled up. No holding it back. Even in church, especially in church. She'd get tickled at something and try to keep quiet, but then her shoulders would start shaking. "And everyone around her would start laughing too?" Marion asked, smiling. "Exactly that. Pastor Ruth used to say Denise's laugh was better than any sermon for lifting spirits." He paused at a stone water fountain, its gentle splashing filling the comfortable silence between them. They resumed walking, and Marion spoke thoughtfully. Sometimes, when something strikes me as particularly funny, I feel this laugh that doesn't quite feel like my own, deep and free. I used to think I was imagining things, but now you wonder if it's her gift too?" Eli finished quietly. Marion nodded, wiping at her eyes. "The medical team warned me about cellular memory, how organ recipients sometimes experience unexpected traits or preferences, but they never mentioned laughter." They completed another lap, their pace steady. A group of doctors hurried past, clipboards in hand, but the garden remained their peaceful sanctuary. "The board's giving you trouble about the ambulance response investigation?" Eli asked after a while, noting how Marion's shoulders had tensed at the earlier mention. "They're worried about liability, reputation, everything except what matters." Frustration crept into her voice. "We have a chance to acknowledge past wrongs and make real changes, but they'd rather bury the truth than face it." "Sounds familiar," Eli said. "Like my interview yesterday, all about optics and narratives. Not much about 20 years of honest work." Marion stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "They're wrong, Eli. About you. About this whole situation. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone for a while." A morning breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the sweet scent of late roses. They resumed walking, their steps falling naturally, in sync. "Denise used to say something similar," Eli mused. "Whenever I'd get discouraged about work or life, she'd quote her favorite psalm. 'Though I walk through the valley of the shadow, I will fear no evil,'" Marian completed softly. "That's the psalm you were praying in the chapel that night." Eli nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "It gave me strength then. Still does." They paused, near a wooden trellis covered in climbing vines. Marian placed her hand over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "Every beat is her gift," she whispered, eyes bright with unshed tears. The morning sun cast dappled shadows through the leaves above them, and in that moment both felt the profound connection between loss and life, between ending and beginning, between two strangers brought together by one extraordinary heart. The garden around them continued its quiet morning routine, nurses taking quick breaks, patients doing their prescribed walks, visitors finding moments of peace. But for Eli and Marian, their regular Wednesday walk had become something sacred, a time to remember, to share, and to heal. The First Presbyterian Church buzzed with anticipation as townspeople filled the wooden pews for the Thanksgiving service. Stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the congregation, and the scent of fresh pine garlands wrapped around columns filled the air. Eli sat between Marian and Tasha, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The familiar surroundings brought both comfort and an ache. This was where he and Denise had worshipped together for 30 years. Tasha leaned against her grandfather's shoulder, her usual teenage defenses softened by the solemnity of the occasion. She'd even worn the dress her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. Marian sat perfectly straight, but her normally composed demeanor showed cracks of emotion as she watched families file in, many wearing green donor family ribbons pinned to their clothes. Pastor Ruth stood at the pulpit, her gray hair gleaming in the soft light. "Today," she began, her voice carrying to the rafters, "we gather to give thanks for the precious gift of life and to honor those whose final acts of love continue to bless others." At the front of the sanctuary, a large shape stood covered in white cloth. Eli knew what lay beneath. He'd seen Marian and the quilting circle working late into evenings, though he'd never glimpsed the finished piece. "In this community," Pastor Ruth continued, "we've witnessed how tragedy can transform into hope, how loss can bloom into new life. We've seen strangers become family through the sacred bond of organ donation." Tasha slipped her hand into Eli's and squeezed. He glanced at her, seeing tears brightening her eyes. On his other side, Marian sat very still, one hand pressed against her chest, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her way of acknowledging Denise's presence. "It's time to unveil our memorial quilt," Pastor Ruth announced. "Each name stitched here represents not just a life that ended, but love that continues to pulse through our world." Two deacons stepped forward and carefully removed the white cloth. Gasps filled the sanctuary as the quilt was revealed. A stunning tapestry of blues and greens, with golden threads connecting countless names embroidered in careful script. The morning light caught the metallic threads, making them shimmer like stars. Marian turned to Eli, her voice barely a whisper. "May I? Would you allow me to speak her name?" Eli felt the weight of the moment press against his chest. Speaking Denise's name here, acknowledging her gift publicly, it was a step he hadn't been sure he could take, but looking at Marian's face, seeing the deep respect and gratitude there, he nodded slowly. She stood, her professional poise carrying her forward as she approached the microphone. "I stand before you today," she began, her voice clear but trembling slightly, "as someone who lives because of love. The heart beating in my chest once belonged to Denise Gardner." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Many knew Eli, knew his loss, but few had known this connection. Denise was a woman who loved deeply, her husband Eli, their granddaughter Tasha, this community. In her final act of giving, she saved not just my life, but the lives of 3 others, through organ donation. Her heart continues to beat with that same love. Eli felt tears roll down his cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't solely tears of grief. Tasha's arm wrapped around his shoulders, holding him close. "Every morning," Marian continued, I thank God for Denise's gift, for her family's courage in their darkest hour, and for the miracle that brought us together in healing." The sanctuary erupted in applause, many standing to honor the moment. Pastor Ruth stepped forward, placing a hand on Marion's shoulder as she returned to her seat. After the service, the congregation moved to the fellowship hall for refreshments. Someone had set up old speakers, and hymns played softly in the background. The quilt had been carefully moved to a place of honor on the wall, where people gathered to search for names they knew. Eli stood looking at Denise's name, traced in golden thread, when the music changed to Amazing Grace. Marion appeared beside him, her eyes also fixed on the quilt. "Would you dance with me?" she asked softly. He turned to her, surprised. In all their months of friendship, they'd never shared anything so intimate. But something about the moment, the music, the memories, the shared joy and grief, felt right. "I would be honored," he replied, offering his hand. They moved to a quiet corner of the fellowship hall. Eli placed one hand respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers. They swayed gently to the familiar melody, neither speaking for a moment. "I can feel her," Marion whispered finally. "In moments like this, I can feel her joy." Eli smiled, his heart full. She loved to dance. Used to say it was like praying with your feet. They continued moving to the music, surrounded by their community, but lost in their own world of gratitude and remembrance. For the first time since losing Denise, Eli felt completely at peace with where he was and who he was sharing this moment with. The golden afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns across the floor as they danced. Tasha watched from across the room, her earlier suspicions forgotten, as she saw the genuine joy on her grandfather's face. Other couples had joined them on the makeshift dance floor, but Eli and Marion remained in their quiet corner, moving to the rhythm of Amazing Grace and Grateful Hearts. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the November fog when Eli stepped onto his front porch for the newspaper. His muscles were pleasantly sore from dancing at last night's Thanksgiving service, and a trace of contentment lingered in his heart. The paper lay wrapped in its blue plastic sleeve, heavy with Sunday editions. He bent to pick it up, joints creaking, and nearly dropped it when he saw the front page through the clear wrapper. There, splashed across the width of the paper, was a grainy photo of him and Marion dancing in the church fellowship hall. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "CEO exploits donor family amid scandal." His hands trembled as he tore open the plastic. The article, written by reporter Darius Cole, painted an ugly picture. It described Marion's calculated cultivation of a relationship with him, timing it perfectly with investigations into Klein Med's past ambulance response disparities in predominantly black neighborhoods. The photo caption read, "Klein Med CEO Marion Klein dances with donor family member in apparent PR move." Eli sank onto the porch swing, the chains squeaking as his weight settled. The morning air felt suddenly cold against his skin. The article quoted anonymous sources, claiming Marion had orchestrated their entire connection to deflect attention from the ambulance controversy. The screen door creaked, and Tasha stepped out in her fuzzy pajamas, clutching her phone. "Grandpa?" Her voice cracked. "The school just emailed. They're reviewing my scholarship application because of recent developments." Eli's chest tightened. He'd been so proud when she'd told him about applying for the Klein Med nursing scholarship. Now that dream was being tainted by suspicion and politics. "Come here, baby," he said, opening his arms. She curled up next to him like she used to as a little girl, her shoulders shaking. "It's not fair," she whispered. "We didn't do anything wrong." His phone buzzed in his pocket. The school principal's number flashed on the screen. With a heavy heart, he answered. "Eli," Principal Matthews said, her voice strained. "I'm sorry to call on a Sunday, but given the circumstances, the board feels it's best if you take a paid leave until this situation resolves itself." "Sarah," he protested, "I've mopped these halls for 15 years. "I know, Eli. But the optics. We can't have parents thinking we're involved in some kind of cover-up. It's temporary, just until things die down." He ended the call and stared at the phone in his hand. 15 years of showing up early, staying late, fixing things no one else could fix, and now he was being pushed aside like a broken mop. Tasha grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning the article. That reporter twisted everything. He made it sound like Miss Klein was using us, like we were too stupid to know better. Her voice rose with each word. He didn't even mention Grandma Denise's name. Eli's phone buzzed again. A text from Pastor Ruth. Emergency board meeting at KleinMed. They're demanding Marion's resignation, praying for you all. The news hit him like a physical blow. Marion, who had handled Denise's heart with such reverence, who had given his grief space to breathe and heal, was being punished for showing simple human kindness. His eyes fell on the photo again. In the grainy black and white, you couldn't see the tears of gratitude in people's eyes as Marion spoke Denise's name. You couldn't hear the soft melody of amazing grace that had moved them to dance. You couldn't feel the holy weight of that moment when grief and grace had waltzed together. Inside, the kitchen phone started ringing. Probably reporters, hungry for more quotes to twist. Tasha squeezed his hand. "What are we going to do, Grandpa?" Eli stood up, his joints protesting. The paper was still in his hands, that damning headline staring up at him. With a sudden surge of anger, he slammed it down on the porch railing. "Lord, why now?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Just when we were starting to heal, the paper slid off the railing, scattering pages across the front yard like dead leaves. Neither of them moved to pick them up. They sat in heavy silence, watching the morning fog slowly lift, revealing a world that suddenly felt colder and more hostile than it had just yesterday. Through the window, they could hear the kitchen phone ringing again, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet morning like an accusation. Eli reached for his granddaughter's hand, holding it tight, as if their shared grip could somehow keep their world from unraveling any further. The porch light stayed off as evening crept across the neighborhood. Eli sat in the darkness, watching his phone light up for the 5th time with Marion's name. Each time, he let it ring until the screen went dark again. The wooden swing creaked beneath him, a sound that usually brought comfort but now felt like an accusation. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text. "Eli, please, we need to talk about this, Marion." He slipped the phone back into his pocket, feeling the weight of it like a stone. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across his front yard. Mrs. Hattie's cat prowled along the fence line, its eyes glowing in the dim light. The screen door squeaked behind him. Tasha's footsteps were soft on the wooden boards as she came to stand beside the swing. "You're being ridiculous, Grandpa," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Sitting out here in the dark won't fix anything." "Not much to fix," Eli replied, his voice rough from hours of silence. Reporter said what needed saying. "Since when do you believe everything you read?" Tasha dropped onto the swing beside him, making it sway. I thought she was different. But you were too trusting, Grandpa. Too willing to believe someone like her would care about people like us without wanting something in return." The words stung, mostly because part of him feared she was right. He rubbed absently at his scar, feeling the raised tissue beneath his sleeve. "Your grandmother always said I was too quick to see the good in folks." "This isn't about seeing good in people," Tasha pressed. "It's about being smart, about protecting ourselves." She pulled out her phone, the blue light harsh in the darkness. "Look at what they're saying online. They're calling us publicity props. They're saying KleinMed is using Grandma's memory to cover up their mistakes." Eli's throat tightened. "That's exactly why we need to step back. I won't have your grandmother's name dragged through the mud again. Won't have you losing opportunities because of my poor judgment." "But what if?" "No." Eli's voice was firm. "I've already called the school board, told them I'm taking a leave of absence until this dies down, and I want you to withdraw that scholarship application." "Grandpa, it's not up for discussion, Tasha." He stood, his joints protesting. "I promised your mother I'd protect you when she couldn't. That's what I'm doing now." Across town, in her corner office at KleinMed, Marion Klein sat alone in the growing darkness. Her desk phone blinked with dozens of messages, but she ignored them all. Instead, she held her hand against her chest, feeling the steady rhythm that had once belonged to Denise Gardner. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the silence. "I don't know if I deserve this heart, but please Please don't let this destroy what it's helped build. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she remembered Eli's face at the Thanksgiving service. How his eyes had softened when she'd spoken Denise's name. Her office door was closed, blinds drawn against the curious stares of her staff. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her PR team had already drafted 3 different resignation statements. But none of that mattered as much as the silence from Eli's house, the unanswered calls that felt like physical pain in her chest. Back on his porch, Eli watched the first drops of rain begin to fall. The drops grew heavier, drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. Thunder rolled in the distance, and he finally stood to go inside. Tasha followed, her shoulders stiff with disappointment. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "Running away won't protect anyone." Eli paused in the hallway, looking at the familiar family photos on the wall. Denise's smile beamed from every frame, unchanged by time or tragedy. The rain pelted against the windows as he touched one of the pictures. "I can't drag her name through mud again," he muttered, more to himself than to Tasha. The words felt heavy in his mouth, like stones. Behind him, Tasha's footsteps retreated upstairs, leaving him alone with the sound of rain and memories. His phone buzzed one final time in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know it was Marion. The weight of it seemed to grow with each unanswered call, each ignored message. But he couldn't bring himself to answer, couldn't risk hearing her voice and weakening his resolve. The rain continued its assault on the windows, matching the storm of emotions in his heart. Mrs. Hattie Monroe's fingers danced across dusty file boxes in the library's basement archive. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she pulled another cardboard container from the metal shelving. Her reading glasses perched precariously on her nose as she muttered to herself, flipping through yellowed papers. Town Council Minutes, 2013. No, too recent. Ah, here we go, 2008. She settled into a rickety wooden chair, spreading the documents across a scratched table surface. The basement smelled of old paper and forgotten memories, but Hattie was in her element. This was what she did best, digging for truth in the details others overlooked. "Something's not adding up about this ambulance business," she said to no one in particular. Her arthritis-curved fingers traced lines of text, pausing occasionally to jot notes on her small spiral pad. The basement's silence was broken only by the rustling of papers and her occasional inch-effif of discovery. 3 hours into her search, Hattie's eyes widened. "Well, would you look at that?" She leaned closer to the page, double-checking the date and signatures. The original ambulance distribution contract had been approved in 2007, 2 years before Marion Klein became CEO. Not only that, but the following year's minutes showed Marion's first major action as CEO, terminating that very contract. Hattie's hands trembled slightly as she carefully photographed the relevant pages with her phone. "I may be old, but I know how to document," she said proudly, checking each image for clarity. The evidence was clear as day. Marion hadn't created the bias system. She'd ended it. Gathering her things with newfound energy, Hattie hurried up the basement stairs as quickly as her knees would allow. The main library was closing, the evening sun casting long shadows through the tall windows. The young librarian at the desk gave her a concerned look. "Mrs. Monroe, are you all right? You've been down there for hours." "Never better, dear," Hattie replied, patting her purse where she'd tucked the phone with its precious photos. "Sometimes the truth just needs a little coaxing to come out." She drove straight to Pastor Ruth's house, her ancient Buick creeping along at exactly 5 miles under the speed limit. The pastor's porch light was on, a warm welcome in the gathering dusk. Hattie parked carefully, grabbed her purse, and made her way to the door with purpose in every step. Pastor Ruth answered on the second knock, still wearing her clerical collar from evening services. "Hattie, what brings you here so late?" "The truth, Ruth. That's what brings me." Hattie bustled past her into the living room, already pulling out her phone. "Look at what I found in the archives." They sat together on Ruth's worn floral couch as Hattie explained her discoveries, showing the photos of the council minutes. Ruth's expression grew more serious with each revelation. "This changes everything," Ruth said quietly, studying the dates again. "The story they're pushing in the paper, it's all backwards." Exactly. Hattie's voice rose with conviction. That reporter didn't do his homework. Marion Klein isn't the villain here. She's the one who tried to fix things. And now, poor Eli's pulling away based on lies. Pastor Ruth stood, her decision clear in her stance. We need to talk to Eli. He's been avoiding everyone since the article came out, but this. She gestured at the phone with its damning evidence. This he needs to hear. They found Eli at home, sitting in darkness on his front porch. The newspaper still lay crumpled where he'd thrown it that morning. He looked up as they approached, his face tired in the streetlight's glow. "Evening, ladies," he said flatly. "If you're here about Marion, we're here about the truth," Pastor Ruth interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. She sat beside him on the porch swing while Hattie perched on the railing, clutching her phone like a lifeline. As they showed him the evidence, Eli's expression shifted from resignation to surprise, then to something deeper, a mix of shame and hope. The proof was undeniable. Marion had inherited a broken system and worked to fix it, not exploit it. "Running away never healed anyone," Ruth told him firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Show up." The porch swing creaked in the silence that followed, while fireflies began to dot the evening air with their gentle light. The community hall buzzed with tension as people squeezed into every available seat. Metal folding chairs scraped against the worn linoleum floor while latecomers lined the walls, their murmured conversations creating a nervous hum. Local news cameras perched at the back, their red lights blinking steadily. Eli Gardner slipped in through the side door, choosing a spot in the last row where shadows gathered beneath flickering fluorescent lights. His work boots were freshly polished, his plaid shirt pressed, small dignities he clung to during his suspension. A few people nodded in his direction, but most avoided eye contact, unsure where loyalty should lie in this tangled situation. At the podium up front, Marion Klein stood straight-backed in her navy blazer, though her complexion was notably pale under the harsh overhead lights. Her hands rested lightly on either side of the wooden lectern, steady despite the stakes. The Klein Med board members sat in a grim line behind her, their expressions carefully neutral. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Marion began, her voice clear and measured. "I've called this town hall because our community deserves direct answers, not speculation." She paused, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "First, I want to address the ambulance response time disparities that occurred in predominantly black neighborhoods a decade ago." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Darius Cole, the investigative reporter, leaned forward in his seat, pen poised over his notepad. "Those decisions were wrong," Marion continued firmly. "While they predated my tenure as CEO, that doesn't absolve Klein Med of responsibility. When I discovered the contract issues in my first year, I terminated the agreement immediately. But I should have been more transparent about why. I should have acknowledged the harm more publicly." She took a slow breath. "Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of the Community Equity Ambulance Fund. I'm seeding it with my entire annual bonus, $300,000, to ensure equal emergency response times across all neighborhoods." The whispers grew louder. A board member shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marion held up her hand for quiet. "But there's something else I need to address," she said, her voice softening. "The speculation about my relationship with Eli Gardner and his family." Her eyes found Eli's in the back row. 5 years ago, I received a heart transplant that saved my life. Medical privacy laws prevented me from knowing my donor's identity. But when I met Eli Gardner and saw his distinctive scar, I recognized him from the hospital chapel the night his wife Denise became my donor. The room grew still. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. "Every beat of this heart is a gift," Marion continued, pressing her hand to her chest. "Every day of life I've been given came at the cost of another family's deepest loss. My connection with Eli and his granddaughter Tasha isn't about publicity or damage control. It's about gratitude. It's about honoring Denise's legacy of giving life to others." Tears glinted in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I've never spoken publicly about my transplant before, but I won't let anyone twist this sacred connection into something tawdry or calculated." The timing of our meeting was completely unexpected. The friendship that followed has been one of the greatest blessings of my second chance at life. Movement stirred at the back of the room. Eli Gardner rose slowly to his feet, his tall frame casting a long shadow. The room hushed as he cleared his throat. "Folks know me here," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly despite its usual quiet tone. "Known me 30 years as the school janitor. Known my Denise when she volunteered at the library. Known our granddaughter Tasha since she was born." He paused, running a weathered hand over his chin. "The woman carrying my Denise's heart has treated us like family, not a headline." Complete silence filled the hall. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. Then, starting softly at first, applause began to ripple through the crowd. It built steadily until the sound filled every corner of the room, echoing off the walls like thunder. Through tear-blurred eyes, Marion watched as Darius Cole slowly lowered his camera, his face thoughtful. The board members behind her had risen to their feet, joining the standing ovation. But she kept her gaze on Eli, whose quiet dignity had just changed everything. In that moment, she knew that sometimes the truest healing came not from careful PR strategies or damage control, but from simple honesty spoken from the heart that connected them all. The fluorescent lights of the community hall cast harsh shadows as people began filing out, their voices a mixture of relief and contemplation. Empty chairs scattered at odd angles showed the hasty departure of some attendees, while others lingered in small clusters, discussing what they'd witnessed. The truth about KleinMed's ambulance services had landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward through the gathered crowd. Darius Cole stood near the back wall, his reporter's notebook closed for once, watching Marion and Eli speak quietly with Pastor Ruth and Mrs. Hattie. His usual sharp-eyed confidence had dimmed, replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, his pressed shirt wrinkled from hours of sitting hunched over his notes. Finally, as the room thinned out, Darius squared his shoulders and walked toward the small group. His footsteps echoed in the nearly empty hall, each step seeming to cost him something. Eli noticed him first, his body tensing slightly, but he didn't move away. Marion turned more slowly, her face composed but guarded. "Mr. Cole," she said evenly, neither welcoming nor dismissing. Darius cleared his throat. "Mrs. Klein, Mr. Gardner." He paused, fingers drumming against his closed notebook. "I owe you both an apology." The words hung in the air between them. Pastor Ruth and Mrs. Hattie exchanged glances, but stayed quiet, bearing witness. "I had the facts," Darius continued, his voice growing rougher. "But I twisted them, made assumptions that would sell papers instead of telling the real story." He looked directly at Eli. "That photo of you two dancing, I knew it wasn't what it seemed, but I used it anyway." Eli's weathered face remained steady, but his eyes softened slightly. He'd seen enough men wrestle with pride to recognize genuine remorse. "The truth was right there in front of me," Darius went on, turning to Marion. "A CEO who actually fixed problems she inherited. A donor family and recipient finding healing together. But I chose sensation over substance." He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket. "I've already submitted this to my editor. It's running tomorrow, front page." Marion took the offered paper, unfolding it carefully. Eli stepped closer to read over her shoulder. The headline read, "Hearts United. How Tragedy Sparked Community Healing." "It's the story I should have written first," Darius said quietly. "About how a heart transplant connected two families. About how Mrs. Klein's first act as CEO was terminating that discriminatory ambulance contract. About how real change happens through understanding, not accusations." Mrs. Hattie sniffed loudly, dabbing at her eyes with a flowered handkerchief. "Well, it's about time somebody said it plain." Darius managed a small smile. "The article includes Mrs. Hattie's research proving the timeline, and Pastor Ruth's perspective on how your friendship developed naturally, through shared grief and gratitude." He looked between Marion and Eli. "I'm hoping it helps undo some of the damage my first piece caused." Eli spoke for the first time, his voice low but clear. "Damage has a way of teaching us things if we let it." Marion nodded slowly, refolding the paper. "Truth does set us free," she said, extending her hand to Darius. "Thank you for choosing it, even belatedly." Darius grasped her hand firmly, relief visible in every line of his face. "I won't forget this lesson," he promised. "Sometimes the best stories aren't about conflict at all. They're about how people find their way back to understanding." As they shook hands, the last rays of evening sun slanted through the high windows, touching everything with warm, golden light. In that moment, the distance between reporter and subjects, between CEO and janitor, between accusation and redemption, seemed to dissolve into something simpler, just people choosing to see each other clearly at last. "Truth sets us free," Marian repeated softly, and in the gentle echo of those words, healing continued its quiet work. The morning sun filtered through the dusty Venetian blinds in the school hallway as Eli made his way to Principal Chen's office. His work boots, freshly polished that morning, echoed against the linoleum floors. Students rushing to their first classes offered quick waves and hellos. They'd missed him during his forced leave. The secretary, Mrs. Martinez, looked up from her computer with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Gardner. Principal Chen is expecting you." She gestured toward the inner office door, her eyes twinkling with what seemed like happy anticipation. Eli's heart thumped harder as he approached the door. He'd walked this path countless times before, but today felt different. Taking a deep breath, he knocked twice. "Come in, Eli," Principal Chen called out. Inside, Eli found not just Principal Chen, but also 3 members of the school board seated around a small conference table. His first instinct was to retreat, but Chen's encouraging nod kept him rooted. "Please, have a seat," said Dr. Williams, the board president, indicating an empty chair. Eli settled into the chair, his weathered hands folded in his lap. The leather creaked beneath him as he shifted, trying to find comfort in this uncomfortable situation. "Mr. Gardner." Dr. Williams began, clearing his throat. "We've asked you here today to address the events of the past few weeks." He paused, exchanging glances with his colleagues. "First and foremost, we owe you an apology." Eli blinked, surprised. The scar on his forearm tingled as he absorbed the words. "The board's decision to place you on leave was hasty and frankly wrong," continued Williams. "We allowed speculation and fear of bad press to override our judgment of your character and your 15 years of dedicated service to this school." Principal Chen leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Eli, you've been more than just a janitor here. You've been a mentor to countless students, a reliable presence in times of crisis, and someone who's always gone above and beyond what's asked of you." Mrs. Thompson, another board member who'd known Eli since his first day, spoke up. "We've reviewed your personnel file, including all the letters of recommendation from teachers and staff over the years. We've also seen the petition students started for your return. Over 500 signatures." Eli's throat tightened. He hadn't known about the petition. "But what really opened our eyes," Dr. Williams continued, "was watching you handle this situation with such dignity. The truth about your connection to Ms. Klein and Klein Med. It's not just a headline, it's a testament to human compassion and the power of giving." Principal Chen pulled out a folder from her desk. "Which brings us to the second reason we called you here today. We'd like to offer you the position of facilities supervisor, effective immediately." Eli's eyes widened. He'd applied for this position 3 times over the years. "The role comes with a significant pay increase, full benefits, and oversight of our maintenance staff across all district buildings," explained Dr. Tufour. Williams. "We'll also provide back pay for your time on leave." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly. "You've always had a gift for fixing things, Eli. Not just equipment, but situations too. You know every inch of this building, every person who works here, and most importantly, you understand what this school means to our community." Principal Chen slid the contract across the table. "We need someone who can lead with both technical skill and heart. Someone who knows that maintaining a school isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about creating an environment where learning can flourish." Eli stared at the paper before him, his vision blurring slightly. He thought of Denise, how she'd always believed in him, always pushed him to reach higher. I don't know what to say," Say yes, Principal Chen encouraged gently. We need you here, Eli. Now more than ever. With hands that trembled slightly, Eli picked up the pen. As he signed his name, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Not just from the recent troubles, but from years of feeling overlooked. Welcome back, Mr. Gardner, Dr. Williams said, standing to shake his hand. Or should I say, Supervisor Gardner? After finishing the paperwork and receiving congratulations from everyone present, Eli stepped out into the hallway. The morning sun had risen higher now, streaming through the windows and warming the corridor. As he walked toward the exit, his steps felt lighter than they had in weeks. Without even realizing it at first, he began to whistle, a soft, gentle tune that Denise used to hum while making Sunday breakfast. Amazing Grace had been her favorite, and she'd fill their little kitchen with the melody while pancakes sizzled on the griddle. The familiar notes floated through the empty hallway as Eli headed home, his heart full and his spirit renewed. Each step seemed to carry him closer to peace, closer to the kind of happiness Denise would have wanted for him. The melody followed him out into the bright morning, a beautiful reminder of love that endures and grace that restores. Tasha sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through her bedroom window, highlighting the medical textbooks stacked neatly on her desk. Her phone buzzed with another message from her study group about tomorrow's biology test, but her eyes remained fixed on her email inbox. She'd been checking it obsessively since the town hall meeting, hoping for news about her scholarship. The waiting felt like torture. Each day brought fresh worry that her dreams of nursing school would slip away, despite the positive changes happening around them. The familiar notification sound made her jump. Her heart raced as she saw the sender. Klein Med Scholarship Committee. For a moment, her finger hovered over the message, afraid to open it. She took a deep breath, remembering her grandmother's words whenever she felt scared. Face it head, on, baby girl. Grandpa, she called out, her voice wavering. Can you come here? Eli appeared in her doorway moments later, still wearing his work clothes from his first day back as facilities supervisor. The new badge gleamed on his chest, but concern filled his eyes as he saw Tasha's expression. What is it, sweetheart? The scholarship committee. She patted the space beside her on the bed. I can't open it alone. Eli sat down next to her, the old mattress springs creaking under his weight. His familiar presence steadied her, just as it had through all the hard years after losing Grandma Denise. He wrapped one arm around her shoulders, his lightning scar visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. Together, then, he said softly. Tasha clicked the email open. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, then grew wide. Oh my God, she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Dear Ms. Gardner, she read aloud, her voice trembling. We are pleased to inform you that your Klein Med Legacy of Life Scholarship has been reinstated with full honors. Your application demonstrated exceptional academic achievement and a profound understanding of the healing mission that drives our healthcare community. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued reading. Furthermore, in recognition of your family's unique connection to our institution and your grandmother's gift of life, we are proud to announce the establishment of the Denise Gardner Donor Family Grant Program. This expansion will provide additional support for textbooks, uniforms, and clinical supplies to all scholarship recipients from donor families. Eli's arm tightened around her shoulders. She could feel him shaking slightly. The committee was particularly moved by your essay's exploration of how personal loss inspired your commitment to nursing. Your desire to honor your grandmother's legacy by caring for others exemplifies the very spirit of the medical profession. Tasha couldn't read any more through her tears. She turned and buried her face in her grandfather's chest, sobbing with relief and joy. His work shirt smelled of pine cleaner and coffee, familiar and safe. She did it, Tasha managed between sobs. Marion really did it. Eli stroked her hair gently. No, baby girl. You did this. Your hard work, your grades, your heart for helping people, that's all you. Marion just made sure you got a fair chance. Tasha sat up, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. But naming the grant program after Grandma, that means so much. Other families like us will get help too. Your grandmother always said education was the key to everything, Eli remembered, his voice thick with emotion. She'd tutor kids from the neighborhood at our kitchen table, remember? Never let anyone leave until they understood their homework. Remember how she'd bake cookies for everyone during finals week? Tasha smiled through her tears. The whole house would smell like chocolate chips and highlighter markers. They both laughed at that, the sound mingling with their sniffles. Tasha looked around her room, at the anatomy charts on her walls, the stack of volunteer badges from the hospital, the framed photo of Grandma Denise in her garden. Everything felt different now, like a dream shifting into reality. She opened her laptop again, reading the rest of the email more carefully. The first semester's funds will be available in August. There's a welcome ceremony for all recipients. Oh, they want me to speak about the new grant program at the ceremony. You'll do beautifully, Eli assured her. Just speak from your heart, like you always do. Tasha closed her laptop and leaned against her grandfather's shoulder. The late afternoon light had softened to gold, casting a warm glow across her bedroom. In that moment, she felt her grandmother's presence so strongly it almost took her breath away. She turned her face up to Eli, who looked down at her with eyes full of love and pride. "Grandma would be proud," she whispered softly. Eli kissed her forehead tenderly, his voice gentle. "She always was, baby girl. She always was." The Klein Med boardroom gleamed under soft recessed lighting, its mahogany table reflecting the morning sun that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marian stood at the head of the table, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands steady as she arranged her presentation materials. The familiar weight of Denise's heart beat strong in her chest, giving her courage. The board members filed in one by one, their expressions carefully neutral. These were the same faces that had whispered about resignation just days ago. Now they settled into their leather chairs, some with coffee cups, others with tablets, all waiting to see how their CEO would handle this pivotal moment. "Good morning," Marian began, her voice clear and confident. "Before we discuss the new initiatives, I want to thank you for allowing me to address the recent concerns directly through the town hall approach." She clicked through her first slides, showing graphs of community response and media coverage. "Our transparency has resulted in a 40% increase in positive public sentiment. More importantly," she paused, making eye contact with each member, "it's opened a dialogue about real issues that need our attention." Mr. Patterson, usually her toughest critic, leaned forward. "The numbers are impressive, Marian, but what about the cost? That's a significant bonus you're redirecting to the ambulance fund." "It's not just about numbers," Marian replied, turning to a new slide showing faces, patients, staff, community members. "It's about trust. When I received my heart transplant, I learned that healing isn't just physical. It's about restoration of faith, in medicine, in people, in possibilities." She walked them through the proposed initiatives: expanded donor family support services, community health education programs, and the enhanced scholarship program that would help train the next generation of healthcare workers. The budget projections showed careful planning, with costs offset by increased community partnerships and positive press coverage. "What strikes me," said Dr. Chen, adjusting her glasses, "is how you've turned a potential crisis into an opportunity for growth. This isn't damage control, it's genuine reform." Heads nodded around the table. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been particularly concerned about the media scandal, spoke up. "The reporter's follow-up piece has generated more goodwill than any paid advertising campaign could have achieved. People respect leaders who admit past mistakes and take concrete action to fix them." Marian clicked to her final slide, a photo from the town hall meeting. It showed her at the podium, with Eli standing in the background, his presence a testament to the power of truth and reconciliation. "This is who we are," she said softly. "Not perfect, but committed to doing better. Every day we have the privilege of saving lives. Now we have the opportunity to heal more than just bodies." The board chairman, Mr. Fection Thompson, cleared his throat. "I believe we've seen enough." He looked around the table. "Those in favor of fully supporting these initiatives and retaining Ms. Klein as CEO?" Hands raised unanimously. Mr. Patterson even managed a smile. "Well done, Marian. You've shown us what leadership really means." The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations. Board members lingered, discussing implementation details with new enthusiasm. Mrs. Rodriguez hugged Marian briefly. "You've made us proud," she whispered. As the boardroom emptied, Marian gathered her materials slowly, letting the reality sink in. She'd faced the possibility of losing everything: her position, her reputation, the chance to honor Denise's gift. Instead, truth had created a path forward. She walked to her office, nodding to her assistant, who beamed and gave a thumbs up. Inside, she closed the door quietly and looked around at the familiar space. The degrees on the wall, family photos, the small cross her mother had given her before her transplant surgery. Marian's legs felt weak suddenly. All the strength she'd mustered for the presentation seemed to drain away, leaving her with nothing but gratitude. She knelt beside her chair, pressing one hand to her heart, Denise's heart, and bowed her head. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "Thank you for second chances, for truth that sets us free, for hearts that heal in more ways than one." The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the high school lawn as the smell of grilled hot dogs and hamburgers wafted through the warm summer air. Red and white checkered tablecloths dotted the grass, weighted down with paper plates and plastic cups against the gentle breeze. Children squealed and darted through streams of bubbles, their shadows dancing on the fresh-cut grass. Marian walked through the crowd in a casual blue sundress, so different from her usual business attire. She carried a tray of homemade lemonade, stopping to chat with parents and teachers. Her smile came easily now, genuine and warm, as she bent to offer a cup to Mrs. Hattie, who sat in her favorite lawn chair, directing traffic like a queen on her throne. "You outdid yourself with these decorations, dear," Mrs. Hattie said, gesturing at the paper lanterns strung between the trees. "Though I still say we should have hung more on the east side. Next time, we'll let you supervise the whole operation." Marian laughed, patting the older woman's shoulder. Near the edge of the celebration, under a spreading maple tree, Eli worked steadily with his tools laid out in precise order on a red shop towel. The new bench was solid oak, its wood gleaming with fresh finish. He checked each bolt with careful attention, just as he had in his Army motor pool days. The dedication plaque caught the sunlight. "In memory of Denise Gardner, her love lives on." Principal Roberts approached with 2 cold sodas, handing one to Eli. "Need any help there, Mr. Facilities Supervisor?" Eli smiled, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Almost done, sir. Just making sure it's sturdy enough to last generations." "Like everything you do," Roberts nodded, taking a sip. "You know, having you in charge has made a real difference. Place runs smoother than ever." A group of teenagers rushed past, including Tasha in her new nursing program t-shirt, her braids bouncing as she ran. She paused just long enough to give her grandfather a quick side hug before chasing after her friends. "Look at her go," Eli said softly, pride warming his voice. "Sometimes I see so much of Denise in her, it takes my breath away." Marian approached, carrying a plate of grilled corn, her heels sinking slightly in the soft grass. "How's it coming along?" "Just finished," Eli said, standing and brushing off his hands. "Want to test it out?" They sat together on the bench, watching the party swirl around them. Someone had started playing old Motown hits, and couples were swaying to "My Girl," while kids attempted elaborate dance moves nearby. "I remember Denise loved this song," Marian said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to her chest. "You told me she used to sing it while making Sunday breakfast." Eli nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Every single week. Pancakes and the Temptations, that was her signature move." The maple leaves rustled overhead, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the bench. A little girl in pigtails ran up to them, offering slightly squashed cupcakes with proud determination. "Thank you, sweetheart," Marian said, accepting hers with exaggerated care. The girl beamed and skipped away, leaving a trail of sprinkles. "You know," Eli said, carefully peeling the wrapper from his cupcake, "I never thought I'd be sitting here like this. After losing Denise, I figured that was it for joy, you know, just me and Tasha, getting through each day. Marian listened, her expression soft. And now? Now I see how life keeps surprising you, how love finds new ways to grow. He gestured at the party, at Tasha dancing with her friends, at the community gathered together in the fading summer light. Denise would have loved all this. She always said a heart was meant for sharing. Mrs. Hattie's voice carried across the lawn as she directed someone to put those watermelons in the shade, for heaven's sake. A burst of laughter rose from the grill area, where Pastor Ruth was apparently telling one of her famous stories, her hands animated in the telling. Tasha broke away from her friends and headed toward the bench, her face flushed from dancing. She dropped onto the grass at their feet, leaning back against the bench. "Having fun?" Eli asked, offering her a bite of his cupcake. "The best," she grinned, accepting it. "My scholarship letter came today. They want me to speak at the fall ceremony about Grandma's legacy." "She'd be so proud of you," Marian said softly. "You're carrying her caring spirit forward in your own way." Tasha looked up at them both, her expression thoughtful. "You know what's weird? I used to think this whole thing would somehow make us forget her, but it's like she's more present than ever, in all these new ways." The music shifted to a slower song, and more couples drifted onto the makeshift dance area. Tasha's friends called her back, waving enthusiastically. She jumped up, brushing grass from her shorts. "Go on," Eli smiled. "Show them how it's done." They watched as Tasha rejoined her friends, falling easily into their synchronized moves. The setting sun painted everything in warm amber light, making the paper lanterns glow like fireflies. On the new bench under the maple tree, Eli and Marian sat in comfortable silence, watching the next generation dance into the summer evening. Principal Roberts helped Eli wipe down the bench one final time as people began gathering for the dedication ceremony. Parents pulled children away from their games, and conversations quieted to respectful murmurs. The late afternoon sun filtered through the maple leaves, creating shifting patterns on the fresh grass around the bench. Pastor Ruth stepped forward, her gray hair crowned with light, wearing a simple summer dress instead of her usual ministerial attire. She carried her well-worn Bible, its leather cover soft with age. The crowd formed a natural semicircle around the bench, with Eli and Marian standing close by. "Friends," Pastor Ruth began, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "We gather to dedicate this bench not just as a place of rest, but as a testament to love that continues to give." She placed her hand on the smooth oak surface. "Like this strong wood that will shelter many, Denise Gardner's love shelters us still." Mrs. Hattie, settled in a folding chair in the front row, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Well, if Denise were here, she'd tell us all to stop being so serious and remember how she used to chase the kids off her flower beds with that old garden hose." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Eli's shoulders relaxed as he smiled, remembering those summer afternoons when neighborhood children would sprint across their yard, squealing with delight as Denise pretended to be annoyed while secretly enjoying the game. Pastor Ruth opened her Bible to a marked page. "Ecclesiastes tells us, 'To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven.' Today we mark a season of healing, of new beginnings growing from deep roots of love." She raised her hands in blessing over the bench. "Lord, bless this place of rest and remembrance. May all who pause here feel the embrace of your love and the legacy of Denise's generous spirit." "Amen," the crowd responded softly. Eli stepped forward then, his work-worn hands steady on the bench's back. His voice was quiet but clear. "Denise had this laugh," he began, "that would start soft and build until her whole body shook with it. She'd throw her head back, and you couldn't help but laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny." He paused, running his fingers along the smooth wood. "She loved this school, loved watching the kids grow up. She'd be pleased to know people will rest here, share stories, maybe laugh like she did." Tasha, standing nearby in her new nursing student scrubs, wiped tears from her cheeks. Several of the older teachers who had known Denise nodded, their own eyes glistening with memories. Marian stepped forward then, her hand unconsciously rising to rest over her heart. "I never had the blessing of hearing Denise's laugh in person," she said, her voice gentle but strong. But every day, I feel the echo of her joy, her strength, her love for life. She looked at Eli, then out at the gathered community. This heart, that was her final gift, still beats with purpose, still gives life. And now, through this bench, through scholarships, that will help students like Tasha pursue healing work, through our community coming together, Denise's spirit of giving continues to grow. A small breeze rustled through the maple leaves, sending dappled shadows dancing across the dedication plaque. Mrs. Breeze, Hattie sniffled loudly, then announced, "Well, I do believe Denise would say it's time for some of that chocolate cake I brought. Can't properly dedicate anything without cake." More laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tender moment with welcome lightness. Pastor Ruth said a final prayer, and people began to drift back toward the party, chattering and wiping away tears. Eli remained standing by the bench, his hand resting on its sun-warmed surface. Marian stayed close by, watching the shifting patterns of light through the leaves. Without looking up, Eli reached out his other hand toward her. Not hesitant now, not hiding, but open and certain. Marian's fingers slipped into his, warm and real, and she squeezed gently. They stood together in the late afternoon light, their joined hands a bridge between memory and hope, loss and life, ending and beginning. Mrs. Hattie's voice carried across the lawn, directing people toward the dessert table with her usual authority. Children resumed their games, their laughter floating on the summer air. And under the spreading maple tree, beside the bench that would hold so many future stories, Eli and Marian held on to each other, their hearts beating in shared rhythm. The breeze stirred again, carrying the sweet scent of summer flowers and grilled food, of memory and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a child's delighted squeal rose above the party's gentle murmur, bright and joyful as Denise's long-ago laugh. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a canvas of deep purples and blues that faded into the emerging night sky. Most of the block party guests had gone home, their paper plates and plastic cups cleared away by volunteers. Only the gentle chirp of crickets and the soft glow of fireflies remained to paint the evening. Eli sat on the newly dedicated bench, his work shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows in the warm summer air. The lightning scar on his forearm caught the last traces of twilight. Beside him, Marian's silk blouse rustled as she settled more comfortably on the smooth oak surface they'd chosen together. A firefly danced past Eli's nose, making him smile. "Denise loved evenings like this," he said softly. "She'd sit on our front porch for hours, just watching the lightning bugs with her sweet tea." Marian reached into her purse and pulled out something that looked like a small tablet. "I brought something," she said, her voice gentle in the gathering dusk. "My cardiologist gave it to me when I was recovering. It's a portable heart monitor." Eli turned to look at her, his eyes questioning in the dim light. The device fit easily in Marian's palm, its screen dark for the moment. "I've never shown this to anyone else," Marian continued, her fingers trailing over the smooth surface. "Some days when I felt scared or alone, I'd listen to the heartbeat. It reminded me that I was still here, still blessed with this incredible gift." She pressed a button, and a small green light blinked to life. Would you like to listen with me?" Eli's throat tightened, but he nodded. Marian placed the monitor between them on the bench, and after a moment, a steady rhythm filled the quiet evening air. Thump, 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 thump. Strong and sure, just like Denise had been. Eli closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. Each beat seemed to whisper memories, Denise dancing in their kitchen, Denise singing in church, Denise holding baby Tasha for the first time. "It's her gift to both of us," Marian said softly, her words floating on the evening breeze. "Every day, every moment, it's a reminder that love never truly ends, it just changes form." A warm tear slid down Eli's cheek, but it wasn't the painful kind he'd grown used to over the years. This felt different, like release, like acceptance, like grace. The fireflies seemed to pulse in time with the monitor's rhythm now, their gentle lights swirling around the bench like dancing stars. The maple leaves above whispered their own quiet melody, accompanying the steady heartbeat that had once belonged to his beloved wife and now gave life to this remarkable woman beside him. Eli remembered Pastor Ruth's words from months ago. Let gratitude finish what grief began. He hadn't understood then, but now, sitting here with Marion, listening to Denise's heart continuing its faithful work in a new way, he finally did. Marion's hand rested on the bench between them, and Eli found himself reaching for it. Her fingers were warm and real as they intertwined with his. Together, they sat in the growing darkness, watching the fireflies dance and listening to the steady rhythm that connected them. Above them, the first evening stars began to twinkle through the maple's canopy. Eli leaned back, taking in their eternal light. The monitor continued its gentle song. Thump, 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 thump. With Marion's hand in his, hope felt eternal as the stars above, as endless as love itself. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Elias Eli Gardner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.